We can get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have this conversation. We know that as folks are moving through their high school experience, things are looking a little bit differently than they might have expected. Students are facing challenges that their older siblings didn't face as they were going through their senior year and through their college search process. The parents, the cousins, that friends, teachers really haven't had to deal with. So we wanted to just take a little while to talk to students about resources that we have on Colgate's campus, not necessarily to be Colgate specific, but just to introduce students to some ideas and some outlets that might be useful in terms of managing some of the challenges that you're faced with during this year. One thing to keep in mind as you looked at the description for tonight's webinar, you may have noticed that it was sort of talking about managing stress. But as we go through this conversation, I think we're going to sort of think about it from more of a proactive side. So rather than managing stress once it manifests itself, we're going to talk about maintaining wellness and some of the ways that you can really pursue some options that will allow you to keep yourself in a really positive space, no matter what challenges you might come up against, not only this year, but as you move into college next year or the year after, and even into the world after your educational career is over. So just to sort of kick us off with some introductions, my name is Alex Fahey. I am a Senior Assistant Dean of Admission at Colgate. So I'm excited to chat with you today, but I'm actually more excited for all of you because we have two awesome Colgate students who have really cool experiences on campus. They're really going to be the stars of the show tonight. So I will have them introduce themselves. Lauren, why don't you go first?
Hey everyone, my name's Lauren Dervonis. I'm from Vail, Colorado. I'm intending on majoring in international relations and neuroscience. On campus, I'm involved with Do Random Acts of Kindness Club, as well as the women's rugby team, and I teach yoga on campus.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Schwartz. I'm a senior at Colgate. I'm from Florida and I'm majoring in environmental studies and minoring in geography and geology. And some of the things that I do on campus is I'm the sexual assault and prevention chair of my sorority, and I am also a Shaw Wellness ambassador.
Cool. So a little bit of housekeeping in terms of what the next 30 to 45 minutes are going to look like. We have a little bit of information that we want to share with you, but we really want this to be interactive. So the question and answer option on Zoom is there. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to put those in that question and answer. I have questions that I'm prepared to ask Emily and Lauren, but we would really rather have this be driven by the things that you're interested in and the resources that you'd like to know more about. The chat is also there. The chat is really a good place to tell us if you can't hear one of us, if you're having some sort of technology issue. Hopefully we'll be able to address that. We are recording the meeting, so if anyone has to leave early, if we talk about something and you want to know more but it sort of slips out of your mind, don't worry about that. You'll be able to access it later and catch up with anything that you might have missed. So I guess here we go. Just sort of want to acknowledge right now we are in October. For many of you, it is October of your senior year in high school. And so many of these senior year of high school things that you had planned on, that you had hoped for, that you had been excited about, whether that is homecoming, whether that is visiting college campuses, making overnight visits, taking your SAT, some things that are almost a rite of passage aren't really options. Senior year is hard, but it is especially hard when the things that you had planned on and the things that everyone sort of points out as your road to the next step, those aren't available for you. And we know that the challenges that students face with the pandemic, with their college search process, are unique to every student. We really want to allow students to think about some of the different resources that are there to help students really get to know themselves, as well as the ways in which they learn, the ways in which they grow, in order to really get the best out of any situation. So think about sort of the high school experience with college experience as a great opportunity for students to grow. So I'm just gonna ask Emily and Lauren, what is one thing that you have learned about yourself during your college experience? Emily, why don't you go first?
Well, I think for me, I learned how I like need to stay organized and like need to schedule myself like academically. For one, I learned what I'm passionate about, that it's about the environment and conservation, but from there I really needed to work on scheduling out like, okay, if I have an essay like next week, like when do I start this? And that's something that your links will help you with, your friends can help you with, your professors can help you with, but it's like definitely something that like everyone I think should probably learn like sooner or later. And college, it like you hit the ground running, and it's like it really helps to figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. Lauren, you're in a little bit of a different space in your college experience, but what is one thing that you've learned so far?
I think for me, very similar to Emily, I learned time management pretty quickly. But I think another big part of what I've learned about myself in college is kind of a sense of identity. I think when you're at home and you're around your family and your friends you've been with for a long time, it's easy to be reminded of, who you are based on that identity. But it's interesting to kind of go to a different place with people you don't know, activities you're unfamiliar with, new professors, and kind of get to recreate the grounds on which you identify yourself in the body of people around you, which I think is a really inspiring experience, but also empowering in that you can try new things and kind of figure out what you want to do with your life. It's a big process, but it's kind of a cool one too.
Yeah, and definitely. And I think as students go through that process, I think, it's interesting. You both mentioned sort of learning how to schedule your time, how to fill that time that is unstructured, which I think is traditionally sort of one of those rites of passage that students are faced with during their first year of college, because they're coming out of this sort of traditional, very structured high school experience and moving into something that's a little bit more free flowing. I almost feel like this year, where so many high school students are actually faced in an asynchronous, in a virtual, in an at-home learning environment, a lot of students are almost having that experience a little earlier. So they're having the chance this year to sort of figure out what it's like to schedule your time and get your work done when you're not in a classroom for 1 hour per day and having your teacher tell you exactly what to do. But I think sort of that experience of the coming of age and the getting to college and having these new challenges is really important. And I think, as we'll get into this conversation, the idea of seeing how those challenges can come in a number of different directions is really critical too, because students are challenged in different ways. They come in, as Lauren said, from different family experiences, and different aspects of this experience can be a little bit different and approach each student in a different way. Emily, in your experience as a wellness ambassador, I know one of the things that Shaw really focuses on is these different dimensions of wellness. Could you tell us about what those dimensions are? You don't have to list all of them, of course, but how that can sort of redefine the way we think about wellness on campus?
Yes, so I'm just going to quickly go through like just list them all out. So you have social, financial, occupational, intellectual, spiritual, environmental, emotional, and physical. And so all of those work together. So let's look at social. That is fostering like healthy relationships. And when you get onto campus, like one of the things that like you first encounter is like developing new friendships with your peers, but also developing relationships that are more professional with your professors. And so developing those in a way that works for you can really help prevent like future stress and anxiety, which is really important. And then intellectual wellness, that's so all of these 8 dimensions. Shaw Wellness actually spreads throughout the months of the school year, and so every month is a different dimension of wellness. And so right now we're actually in emotional wellness, which is really working on developing your inner strength by practicing self-care. So like, what does that mean for you? And like, for me, that means that I go on a walk every single day. And like, that's how I am able to like reduce my stress and like my anxiety with like all the different like aspects of like college coming in. And just all 8 dimensions are super duper helpful to helping you succeed on your pathway through college.
Definitely. And to sort of give the student perspective on that, Lauren, of course, the transition to the school year this year looked quite a bit different than the transition to the school year last year when you were a first year. In terms of the social wellness that Emily just talked about, what do you feel was your experience sort of making connections with your classmates and with your professors this year versus last year?
It's a great question. It's difficult because I think a lot of our social wellness does come from in-person interactions. And so when everything's virtual, it makes it a lot more difficult to connect with different individuals. I think it shows as a whole the fact that we've moved through our gates and we have more flexibility to interact with one another, how committed everyone is to that social interaction. And my professors as a whole, they all have been super well at communicating what times they're available, and if you can't make their online office hours, they open up new spots for you. I think everyone has made an effort where we would usually have interactions in person to do so online, even though it's different. I think I've been able to maintain and even make new relationships with professors and students alike, which has been not what I expected, but been surprised about for sure.
Yeah, I think as we have seen everything sort of transition to the virtual world, both on campus and out in, anywhere that you might be really, I think that conversation of how do those casual interactions that are such a critical part of the Colgate community, but we know those are a critical part of high school experiences of students really making connections with their teachers, with their counselors, with their recommenders, family, friends. What does that look like? And I know that one of the things that we've seen on campus is actually folks being almost more scheduled than they were beforehand, because rather than being able to just bump into someone and have this conversation with them when you see them in their office or when you see them in the hall, now that has to be, okay, can we get on Zoom and at what time? So there's definitely been some challenges with that, but I think in terms of knowing that those connections are really important for students in their academic development, in their social development, in their general wellness, is something that we've been really committed to and have really seen all across campus. Sort of going back to this idea of 8 dimensions of wellness, it can look different for different people, sort of depending on what they're looking for. I'm going to share one of my favorite fun facts about Colgate. So Colgate has a phys ed requirement. In the early days of the university, in order to get this phys ed credit, students had to carry stone from the quarry, which is up at the top of the hill. They carried it down the hill. They used the stone to build West Hall, which is one of our residence halls that we still use today. We actually opened this school year with a universal quarantine for all of our students. The president of the university for that 2-week period was living in West Hall. The phys ed credit at Colgate is still a requirement. The requirement that you earn that by carrying stone is no longer a requirement. So students can get this in a lot of different ways, but one option is through the Wellness Passport program. So in the Wellness Passport, you can earn credits for doing bystander intervention training. You can go to a meditation hour. There are also opportunities for you to take a class on nutrition or a class on working and learning remotely, how to balance stress in the world. So we know that this idea of physical wellness, of wellness in general, is something that looks different for different types of students. And that's something that we want them to be able to explore from a lot of different angles in this component that is sort of in addition to the academic experience. Lauren, you mentioned earlier that you've been teaching yoga on campus. How did that become part of your Colgate experience? And what does it mean to you, and how does it contribute to the community as a whole?
Sure. So I received my certification the summer before college. So I traveled to India and took my 200-hour certification. And to be honest, coming away from the summer, I didn't really see myself teaching yoga in the future. I thought it was kind of a cool thing I had explored, but didn't quite see myself going into it. And coming onto campus, I joined the rugby team, which I had never done before. It was very foreign to me. And the coach was like, oh, yoga, like we need flexibility. Why don't you kind of come in and teach some of our players so we can have, balanced wellness physically. And so that's kind of how it started for me. And I think while it wasn't something that I originally saw myself doing, I was terrified to teach 60 kids in one class because I hadn't really done that before. But I think it goes to show how comfortable I felt doing something so different and new in my new community. And I think for me, like I talked about earlier, finding that sense of identity, for me, figuring out how I want to kind of carry myself in the future and how I can find things that are stable and kind of routine for me in my life, yoga was that path for me. And I think getting involved on campus and seeing what you can do to make your experience something that's unique to you is such an exciting thing during college. And I think that was kind of my way into getting into that for myself.
Now, Lauren, I like that you said that the idea of teaching yoga to a bigger group of people was a new challenge for you, but you sort of glossed over the fact that you joined the rugby team, never having played rugby before. So let's touch a little bit on that. How do you think that contributed to your transition to Colgate and sort of your ability to balance everything that was happening?
Sure. I think for me, rugby has been the way that I've met most of my friends.
Awesome.
I actually intended to row coming to Colgate. I had spoken to the coach twice, and then all of a sudden I got a flyer under my door. And one of the men on the rugby team who was there early for preseason helped me move in. He's like, hey, you need a hand? Like, I'm off of practice early. And so having those early kind of interactions, going to rookie camp and just seeing how fun it was. I had never played a team sport, but I was like, hey, something new. I might as well try it. So my recommendation would be try as many new things as you can wherever you end up going into college, because you will find incredible, not only communities, but families of people who are so invested in doing different things. And I think for me, even amidst everything going on with the virus, like my team has stayed so tightly knit and connected to what they do and what they love. And I think like that has brought me such like, I don't know, comfort and stability throughout everything that is changing.
Yeah, and sort of how your campus experience has adapted as, you know, we're in the new normal these days, things on campus that are as close to the Colgate experience that we're looking for as they can be. Definitely something that we'll talk about. But I think I like what you said about embracing something new and something that was a little bit unexpected, not what you would have, you know, believed maybe that you would be involved in once you got on campus. I guess on a similar note, Emily, what is one resource or opportunity on campus that has been really critical to you that maybe isn't something that you would have expected?
So I think for me, COVID actually meant more free time. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but I feel like I have a lot more time where I'm focusing more on myself because I've been able to really see like how important that is now. And so for me, this is going to be a very oddball answer, but it's actually the cross country trails is a really important resource for me. It's not obviously like my friends and my professors have been an amazing resource for me, but really just getting out into like nature and just like breathing some fresh air and getting out of my home after our 2-week quarantine and then after having online classes, like that's been like an invaluable resource to me.
Okay, so it's we're in a state of travel restriction. Most people haven't been to campus, and even those who have maybe haven't been to the cross country trails. So can you tell us a little bit more? Where are they? What are they like? What do you like about them?
So Colgate, just to give some background, Colgate is on a massive hill and we have our quads are on like the top of it, but then if you go behind our residential buildings to the tippy top of it, behind them, you are opened into this whole network of different trails. And so when it's not snowing, it's these trails that are surrounded by trees and nature, and there's animals back there, and there's a lot of people that use them, so it's also like a really like just welcoming place because everyone's saying hi to each other. And so you can decide to do like a long loop, you can do a short loop, and they're within maybe a 5-minute walking distance from main campus. And so like I'll go in between like my classes sometimes, and it's like a very accessible place for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely a cool place to go. As Emily said, I think the Colgate hello, the idea that people say hi to each other when they see each other, occurs in the trails as well, but they're also pretty expansive. So it's not like if you're up there and there are 5 people there, it's going to feel crowded. Like you could be up there and have no idea anyone else was there, sort of depending on the experience that you're looking for. I think what both Emily and Lauren have shared have sort of touched on the connections that students make on campus, but also how involved that they are. So it's a place where students take their academics seriously, but also a place where students are filling their free time. They are challenging themselves in a lot of different ways outside the classroom and really growing as individuals in their time outside of class and outside of homework. But I think, as many of you have likely faced, as you have seen your high school experience go virtual, a lot of your clubs and activities having a diminished opportunity to connect and really do some of those programs that have been most powerful. I think the more you're involved, the sort of more difficult it is when all of that is taken away. So of course, Emily, fortunately, has said that she has enjoyed that sort of change and having more time for herself and ability to sort of do the things that she's most interested in. But Emily, I'd also be interested in hearing what is sort of one of the biggest challenges that you've faced as everything has gone virtual, and how have you adapted to that?
So I think my biggest challenge personally is that I am like a very interactive person. I do not do very well on Zoom. I definitely have like attention problems. And so I really do cherish like the times that I get to be like in person. And so half of my classes are in person, and like the times that I get to actually go see my professor and be able to like ask questions in person and be able to like meet the new students, like that is something super important to me, because my like biggest problem like has definitely been how Zoom fatigue. Like even within Shaw Wellness, a lot of our programs now are all on Zoom, because right now, like in Gate 2, it's still like very difficult to get a group of people together inside, and it's starting to get cold. And so just working about that Zoom fatigue, I think.
Yeah. And then similarly, Lauren, if you kind of bring yourself back all the way to the, the day that students found out in March that they were going home for spring break and they were likely going to stay there, how have you adapted from then up until today? And now that you're back on campus, how are things different?
Sure. I think for me, very similar to Emily, I am not an on-person or online sort of person. I don't have social media, so being on a phone or a device for me is very foreign. But I think for me, something that I've really had to do that's been challenging for me is I'm very almost territorial in where I study. I very much like last year had like a specific spot on campus I'd study depending on the subject or the time. And it's been harder to do that this year, especially during quarantine. And so I think I've been really fortunate to speak to my professors more over Zoom, and having those conversations with them about things that I could usually just drop into their office during office hours. Because I was very much one just to kind of pop into an office at any time asking questions. I think having that as a resource has really helped me kind of refocus when I start to get kind of stir crazy in my room. But I think, again, like I said earlier, as we progressed through the gates, we've been able to kind of reopen and go back to those study spaces that we didn't have access to before. And though the weather is getting colder, we can go to the library now, which has been great. But I think that for me as well, the Zoom fatigue and not having those outside of my room spaces to study has been challenging, but there are definitely ways to adapt and get around it.
Okay, and earlier Emily told us about sort of this idea of intellectual wellness, and I feel like that's, Lauren, perhaps connected with these study spaces that you're talking about. You don't have to give away what your best study spaces for each class are, but in terms of your connection with your academic material, how do you feel that having those designated locations is beneficial to you?
For me, I think I've always been able to find an open room with a big whiteboard, a chalkboard. I'm a very visual person, and so there are lots of quiet places, whether it be in the library or in a classroom, in really any building on campus that you can just go and use. And that for me has been big. And I think the library as well, having a larger screen, like a monitor for me has been huge for paper writing and having access to printers as well, because I'm an on paper note taker. So all of those resources for me, the library being the spot where I definitely study most, but I don't spread that information. It's classified.
Classified. Don't tell anyone else outside of this meeting right now.
Right. No one steal my study space.
The library is 5 floors, so you might still go to the library. Lauren might be there, but you won't see her because she's going to be in her top secret location. So
Right.
Don't worry about that. Emily, in terms of your role as a wellness ambassador, I think that idea of ambassador sort of has this very public, very social connotation to it. How have you been able to adapt that to this virtual world? And what is that going to look like continuing to connect with students with sort of the uncertainty ahead?
So I think that the hardest part about, so as an ambassador, like Shaw Wellness decided to have student ambassadors because we recognize at Colgate that like peer-to-peer interactions are very important for like dynamics and for like teaching. And so kind of what Lauren was saying, very, it's, I just lost my train of thought. Give me 1 second.
Totally okay.
Can you ask the question again? So my roommate just walked out the door and it totally threw me off.
Yeah, definitely. So how does your role as an ambassador been able to adapt to the virtual world where people, like you said, it's getting colder outside, it's harder to meet outside, we can't really have big meetings inside. What does it look like?
So similar to what, like for people like Lauren who don't have social media, which is like not that uncommon on Colgate's campus, that's like, I think our greatest barrier, because right now social media is how we reach out to students, because it's really hard to spread the word of mouth, like person to person, since a lot of it is being held online. And so we do a lot of like broadcasting on Instagram. We have YouTube videos to try to support people. We send emails to those who want them. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is on Zoom, but still something that is like very interactive and can still help people like understand their wellness. And so like, for instance, we do wellness kitchens and we have a nutritionist, and if you sign up, Shaw Wellness will provide you with all the ingredients, and then you log into the Zoom and you get to follow along and you get to cook with our nutritionist. And so we've really found we've taken our barriers and we've found loopholes to them to really come together as a community still. And going forth, obviously we don't know what's going to happen in 2021. But with that, we're still like very hopeful that like our message of wellness will still be able to spread to multiple areas of campus, even though we can't always be in person. And while it is getting colder, so in person outdoor things won't be able to happen as much, we're hopeful that soon we can do small gatherings and we can really get back to like what we love doing in person and making those meaningful connections.
So wellness kitchens, I saw an event on the calendar for making macaroni and cheese. Is that a Shaw Wellness event?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
It's important to have the comfort foods as well.
So our nutritionist is amazing. Her name is Emily Holdorf, and we just did a trail mix bar for anyone up the hill. They could make their trail mix. And so we've definitely found all those loopholes. And she is super good about teaching people foods that are healthy for you, but also comfort foods, and in like what moderation you should be eating those foods, and like just very good at like informing you about your eating habits in like a way that is like very fun and like fascinating.
Okay. So Emily is involved with making mac and cheese and making trail mix bars over Zoom. Lauren, how have you been able to transition your involvement with yoga to the virtual world?
Sure. So it's definitely not the same doing yoga over Zoom, but we are still holding classes over Zoom, which is kind of nice because I found at first I was worried we wouldn't have as good of a connection. And I actually find that people are more comfortable doing Zoom over yoga because they're in their own space. They can turn their camera off so they don't feel like they're being watched the whole time. And it's kind of nice just to have your own Zen space while doing yoga, which has been a surprising thing for me, I found, with doing it over Zoom. But it's nice because people still come. I've been surprised. A lot of students join, and even my professors come. My core Spain professor, her little puppy falls asleep next to her mat every time she does Zoom yoga. So we've definitely adapted to doing it over Zoom, and it's not the same, but it's certainly still a resource on campus. And just to touch on what Emily said as well about still having student involvement with a number of different clubs on campus, I think Get Involved has been a big platform shift for a lot of different involvements on campus. Like at least for Do Random Acts of Kindness Club, we've used it to, advertise our events, to have, our roster with all of our members as a way to kind of spread information about our clubs. And I think that has also been a great way that even though things are virtual, people have a way to kind of come together and figure out what clubs they can get involved with and what they can do this semester despite all these limits.
Definitely. So can you actually go even back a little bit from that? What is Get Involved? How does it work? How can students use it?
Sure. So Get Involved is a platform that Colgate uses it gives information on all the different clubs you can be involved in. It has anything from pre-law society to rugby to any craft club. It could be volunteer involvement through Cove. And so basically it just has pictures of different events. It has information about different clubs, and they post their events that they host there as well. So you can RSVP for if it's, you can only have 10 students because of restrictions from the virus. You can track there how many kids are going. And it's really a great way to kind of see what options are out there. I've just been stumbling making an event for DURAC, and I find all these cool events that are being held by other clubs, and I'm like, hey, I might go ahead and join. So it's been a great way to kind of see what options are out there in one space, as opposed to having our club fair where everyone's going around and signing up on sheets, which was a different environment, but it's still there as an option.
Yeah, and I think that sort of desire to make sure that students are aware of everything that's going on campus, whether those are different clubs, different events that those clubs are hosting, different opportunities to get to know each other, and for students to really embrace the opportunities that they have to try something new, is something that you see on campus, whether you're going through a platform like that, or a couple days per week, there will be an email, which is just a link to the campus calendar. I always have to set aside some pretty serious time to read through that. I'm usually jealous of a lot of what is happening. And I've been really, really impressed this fall with how much of that has been able to make the transition and take place, whether it's outside, whether it's over Zoom, in some format that is available. So on this note, we have about 10 more minutes for our conversation. I have more questions that I can ask to Emily and to Lauren, but if anyone has questions about anything that they'd like to know about, whether it's, stresses of college process, sort of the stresses of normal life, and some ways that they might suggest to sort of navigate those, definitely feel free to put those in the question and answer. We can check in on those and make sure that everything is being addressed. But for now, it's just sort of a couple more questions for both of you. What does a sort of typical day on campus look like for you? And how do you find space to sort of fit in wellness to that, whichever dimension of wellness you need?
I can go first. Yeah. I think for me, like a typical day for me, I usually get up in the morning and do yoga on my own first. I kind of separate my own practice from teaching, because I find that when I'm teaching, I'm so focused on other people and their yoga that it's not really my own form of wellness. So I kind of split the two. But I usually do yoga in the morning, and then I've been fortunate to have a couple in-person and online classes. So depending on my schedule for the day, either I go into town for class at the Palace Theater, which is kind of nice to walk into town and get a change of scenery, or I have a Zoom lecture over the computer. And I usually get breakfast, and it's been nice to kind of have the new dining options for lunch as well. But kind of like Emily said earlier, I've definitely had more time on my hands as far as, not having to walk to class for every class. There's more time for me to kind of focus on whether it be different involvement online or just spending more time outside as the leaves change and it's been nice out. And then I usually have practice or some sort of evening class as well. But
awesome.
Yeah, for me, I get up in the morning and I immediately go to my common room, because that's where like my most natural light is, and I do a lot of my work then. And I've chosen, so far I walk to class every day, and that's about a little over a mile since I live downtown. Mm-hmm. And so I really like that time, because I can listen to my podcast, or I can just like listen to the breeze of the trees, and I can look at all the like pretty fall foliage. And that for me is like a very big part of my like day, because I do it every single day. And wellness wise, because my job on campus is revolving around wellness, I do a lot of like research about wellness and try to come up with projects on wellness and how I can like help create an atmosphere that's a lot less stress inducing for students. And then I personally do my like meditation or my workouts right before dinner. And so I always try to make time, even if it's just going to be a 10-minute workout. Like, it's really important to just kind of like clearing your head. And so I found that's like a good way to do it.
Yeah, a nice way to sort of put the things that you've done so far in the day behind you and sort of move into a little bit of normalcy for the evening. Very cool. So we do have a couple of questions from our students who are here with us today, sort of trying to get the current Colgate student perspective. Two of them are pretty closely connected, I think, so I'll put them to you together. We have a question: how did you navigate your college admission process when that felt overwhelming? And then sort of to look a little bit further down the road, were you homesick at all during your first year on campus? And if so, how did you cope with that?
I can take this one first.
Okay.
And so I definitely, like most people, was very overwhelmed during the college process, and like completely understand where everyone is coming from, know that it's completely normal. And for me, that meant not bubbling it all in. Like, I think that's part of like one of the dimensions of wellness, like emotional wellness, is making sure that like you're like just speaking about it. Like, it's okay to be overwhelmed. And when you like get those thoughts out of your head, like, or even journal, like I took up journaling. And so that was like a way for me to like really calm down and like not be as overwhelmed. And then also just like working out and exercising was like really good, released endorphins. And then I was homesick during college, but it wasn't a bad type of homesick. It was a homesick that it was just like Lauren's been saying, like, you're creating your new identity. And so it's just like this weird kind of, you like miss your home and like where you're from, but like you also love being where you're at, and like you love like the new relationships you've developed. And so it's like a good type of homesick, if that makes any type of sense.
Definitely. Lauren, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? If not, it's okay.
Sure. I think as far as the admission process, I am a true believer that I could have ended up at any of the schools I was applying to and could have made my experience what I wanted it to be. And I know it's a super general statement and hard to believe in the moment, because I know you have like the one that you love and maybe the ones you don't so much, but I do believe it's in your own power to make whatever you want your experience to be, no matter where it is. And so you should have the confidence in yourself to know that in the end, you will end up at the school that you enjoy your time at, I do think. And also just taking time to take a break from your process, not filling your schedule with everything you need to get done in a way that you aren't taking a breather, whether it be going outside or exercising or doing those things with friends that you enjoy. And as far as homesickness, I think my first semester, I was so excited about the new part of college that I didn't really feel homesick. But second semester, I missed my mountains at home a lot. So I think going outside for me was my outlet to my homesickness, because that's what connected me to being home.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to what Lauren said, just in terms of sort of going through the process and knowing that it will work out, even if, maybe there are definitely times when it will be overwhelming. But I think also sort of bringing back to what Emily said, know that even if you are taking all your classes at home, staring at your computer screen all day and can't see your school counselor, can't see your teachers, you're not alone in this process. And there are a lot of resources that are there to help you. Sort of my role specifically, I read applications at Colgate. Usually at this time of year, I am traveling all around the country, meeting students in your high school, meeting you at college fairs. And for myself and all of my colleagues, that's not something that we can do this year, which means we have extra time to talk on the phone with students, to chat with students in interviews, over email. So any questions that you have, anytime that the process seems overwhelming to you, know that you're not going through it alone. If you have questions, we're here to answer them, and we would love to connect with you in any way that's helpful. So just let us know. There is no question too silly or too small. I'm sure it's something that we've heard before. So definitely use all your resources, even if they're people you haven't met before. Okay, other question that we have, which is a little bit different than what we've been talking about, but I think is really connected to the sort of experience that all of our students have had on campus this year. The general question is COVID managed at Colgate? So I think the bigger question is sort of, what does that look like? How have students adapted to that? You talked about sort of the gates that we've gone through, some changing restrictions. What does it feel like on campus these days?
I can go ahead and take this one first. I have been pleasantly surprised at how committed my community has been towards following the rules that Colgate has put in place for COVID. I don't know if it's just my friend group or the people that I know, but I have yet to have a person who is willing to kind of bend the rules in a way that would kind of jeopardize community health. I think there's been a great emphasis of our community on being conscious of one another and how our actions affect one another. And I think the fact that I'm able to play rugby with my team right now on the pitch, like during COVID, just goes to show like how well we've been able to manage it as a community. So I would say from my perspective, it's been managed fairly well, and I feel pretty safe on campus as well.
And I think that sort of the commitment that you talk about, and I think the other side of that that comes in, which you sort of referenced, is sort of a collective understanding that it's still something that we're working on, and it's not something that students on campus or faculty or staff are willing to say, yep, it's over with, you know, we're out of the woods, let's get back to normal. I think there's been this really big sort of understanding that it is a new normal, and we can't do everything exactly the way we used to, but the more open we are to doing things the best we can is sort of as the closest that we'll get to the experience all our students are accustomed to, and that they're really looking for in their college experience. So on that note, sort of have one question to wrap it up today. Lauren, Emily, question for both of you. What is the biggest piece of advice you have for students as they are in October of senior year? They are sort of looking at the application process, but also looking for their transition to college, whether that was 4 years ago, 2 years ago. What do you think students should keep in mind in terms of getting the best out of this situation?
I think it's completely what Lauren said. I also am a firm believer that no matter where anyone ends up, it is like you have the ability to make it the best of your opportunity. And so I just think remember to breathe and just remember that it is your senior year, and your senior year is supposed to be a really exciting time. So don't put all of this pressure on yourself that you need to get into this one school, and just remember to let in the little happy things and let wellness into your life, because that's the biggest part, I think.
Yeah, I would say the same exact thing. And I think for me, my last month or few months of senior year was such a blur because everything was so focused on my future. And I think if I were to change one thing, I would slow it down and take it one step at a time. I think it's very easy to want to just launch into the next step of your life because it's there and tangible and exciting. But I think the more you appreciate what you do have in the moment in your chapter of life you're experiencing now is super important too, because you will look back on those memories you make at the end of your senior year and be excited that you did take advantage of them and cherish them as much as you do your future.
Awesome. Thank you both. We have one more question. I think it's really cool. So we'll just do this one as a rapid fire as we're wrapping up here. In what way do you think the experience of interacting online might affect you when things revert back to normal? I'm going to answer that one too. I think one of the things that stands out to me when we're on Zoom is that it's really hard to sort of get the social cues of who wants to talk, who's done talking, who is just starting. So I think once we're back in normal spaces, in face-to-face conversations, I think people are going to be really aware of the dynamics of conversation, which I think is awesome and something that we can all use. So that's just me.
I'm personally most excited to, even when we're walking with masks on, I find myself staring at people because I forget that they can't see me smiling. And it's just a very weird situation. And a lot of times I also can't recognize people. I have very poor eyesight, but also just not being able to see a lot of their face makes it really difficult. And so I think, again, with those social cues and just the overall welcoming atmosphere, I think not having a mask on my face maybe one day could like really just like uplift a little bit.
Definitely.
It's a really cool question. I think for me, it's made me how aware I am now of how much I interject and like interrupt people in person. And so I think going forward now, having Zoom spaced out so that you literally can't talk over someone else, I am far more aware and will do my best to be more aware of interjecting and interrupting people in person, because you can communicate so much more effectively when you give people time to speak.
Awesome. Lauren, Emily, thank you so much for being here and sort of sharing some of your experiences. Thank you so much for everyone who took the time to join us today. Of course, we didn't claim to have the magic solution to any stressful situation that comes about, but I hope this was useful in sort of thinking about some of the strategies and some of the things that are out there to help you when times get tough. So best of luck to everyone for the rest of the school year. If we can support you in any way, please let us know. Have an awesome rest of your night.